Everybody, welcome to the Earn It Podcast. I am your host. Today is Thursday, August 28th, and on today's episode, should you skip class in order to study? All right, especially those of you who have been in nursing school or just new to nursing school, you might have this sensation, you might have this feeling that, hey, I have a test coming up, there's a test right around the corner, and class is 4 hours long, and I don't really have that much time because I'm working, I'm going to nursing school, I have a bunch of kids to take care of, and you think to yourself, should I just skip class and go study somewhere? Whether that's go to the school or whether that's continue to study at home. That also depends. So the answer to the question, should you do that, is a complicated one. And I'm going to break it down. There's only two parts. So the main thing is it depends on the situation, but I've simplified this down to just two situations where you should. Because the amount of instances and the amount of reasons why you should not are pretty numerous. So there's two situations where I think it should be acceptable in order for you to go ahead and stop going to class for that day, or don't go to class that week and study instead. And the first is pretty obvious, but there's some nuance to it that I'm going to go into. The first part is if you are behind. What do I mean by behind? I don't mean behind on assignments, okay? I do not mean behind in any other sense other than, and this is a very specific definition. Behind means that you go through your flashcards. Let's say you're having the thought to yourself, should I study and skip class this week? There's one instance only, and that is that day when you have that thought, two things have to be true. One, you go through your flashcards and you have no clue what the back of those flashcards are, and a lot of it seems unfamiliar. If you're using a tool like Quizlet, if you're legitimately getting 50 or less % correct, or you're having to look things up in order to answer them, which again you should never do with flashcards, that's the first part. But another thing also must be true. The test is 1 week away or less. So again, behind means something very specific, and only this. It is, you go through your flashcards and you don't have any clue what's going on, and the test is a week or less away. Now, here's some specific guidelines in order to not get things twisted. One, if you just don't want to go to class, don't try to tell yourself that you're not doing well on your flashcards just so you don't go to class. If you just don't want to go to class, that's an entirely different issue, okay? And it might be because of the second scenario that I'm going to talk about here shortly, but honestly, it's probably that you don't want to go to class, depending on the class and the situation, right? Now, this does not apply to final exams, okay? First of all, you're probably not going to have a lecture within a week of a final exam, but if you do, this does not apply to final exams for this reason, okay? One, I guess it's a couple reasons. If there's not going to be a final exam review, miss it. Then it's acceptable. Now, no matter how far behind you are, if a lecture is going to have a final exam review, in that case, you need to go, okay? And don't say, I'm going to go for the second half, because that's when they'll do the final exam lectures, because things are very fluid and dynamic and things could change, and they could choose to do a final exam review before class starts, or that could be the only reason. So it starts from the very beginning. So 2 weeks, though, for finals. You need 2 weeks. If you are, 8 days before the final exam and you're looking through all your flashcards and you haven't got a clue what at least half of it is, you have a serious problem, and you absolutely need to prioritize studying above all else. Now, again, this only applies to you folks that are in nursing school because we have to have specific testing averages to continue. That's why this is even an option. Okay? So, another thing is, if you don't go back to the drawing board after you correct this, in other words, after you're already behind and you choose to skip class in order to study, whether that test goes well or not, you need to go back to the drawing board and make sure that this does not become a habit. If this becomes a habit, or it's the third time that you do it that semester, or even the second in a row, you need to force yourself to go to class anyways, and you need to deal with the consequences because you need to straighten out your schedule, you need to straighten out your time management, and you need to figure out why it's not working for you. It is your job and your job alone to fix that. There are resources and help out there that will help you kind of identify that if you just don't have a clue, or if life is just happening, and you know what I mean. I don't mean you broke your toenail. I mean somebody is sick in the hospital, your mom and dad are dying, you have to take care. That's life happening, right? If you aren't reevaluating so that this doesn't happen again, deal with it. Deal with the low grade. Otherwise, go ahead. I mean, you have to, at the end of the day, you have to prioritize your testing habits. But again, if you're just doing this over and over again and not ever going to class, unless it's for the next reason that I'm about to mention, then you have another problem. Okay? So that's it for that. If you're behind, week away or less, and you have no idea what your flashcards are and you don't recognize any of your notes, then you're going to need to skip lecture. But here's the thing. You're going to have to, if your professor does not put recorded lectures on, you are going to have to look at the next PowerPoint or document and extrapolate everything out yourself. Number two, if they do post recorded lectures, then you're going to have to make up that time and watch that recorded lecture. So you're trading being behind in one instance for being behind in another, and you have to be okay with that realization before you continue. Are you okay with needing to watch a lecture that you otherwise wouldn't have to watch later on in that week because you've prioritized studying? Again, it depends on what day of the week that upcoming test is on and what day of the week you're making this realization and you're panicking to the point where you're considering skipping class. The other reason in order to skip class in order to study is a complex one, but I will just if I'm going to put it into a few words, that is if the class is subpar. What I mean by that is if your class consists of a professor that gets up and just literally reads the PowerPoints that you have already had for the past few days or a week or more, and they don't do anything other than that and maybe answer a few questions, that class is not worth going to. I don't care who you are. I don't care who's listening to this, if you're in education. I say this as a fellow educator. If you're showing up to your lecture as a teacher and you're not adding any additional value other than the PowerPoint that you handed them last week, don't expect your students to show up. And to the students, you should not show up to a class that doesn't add value to you. You can take a PowerPoint and make flashcards out of it within 20 minutes, even if it's a huge PowerPoint. However, a good instructor, you're not going to be able to get the full extent of what's intended on your own at home. So again, another thing is, in any way, shape, or form, if you're finding that during class time, you're just not getting the value for your time. In other words, does it take 4 hours for you to do something that you could have done at home or in a library or in a study room in only an hour? If that's the case and your grades are doing well, okay, you should take that time and you should experiment. And regardless of whether you're behind or not. This is regardless of whether you're behind. Maybe you're just listening to this and you're considering just not going to class at all. So the whole thing for not going to class physically is this is a really big risk. If you're a teacher listening, and I think I do have one or two, if you're listening to this and you have pre-recorded lectures beforehand, your intention is good in doing a flipped classroom. However, if you have students show up and you simply summarize or regurgitate that same information that you just went through trouble lecturing and recording and posting, do not expect students to show up. You have to add something different. In my personal nursing school, from what I've seen, is that instructors that are trying to do a flipped classroom are doing so very well. And generally, class is not a lecture. If your class is not a lecture, because the pre-recorded lectures acted as the lectures, and you're getting together and all you're doing is applying what you should have gone over, you absolutely should go to class, because you cannot get that on your own unless you have mastered how to do the Feynman method on your own. Yes, I have podcasts and YouTube episodes on this. I recommend you check them out. Unless you're supremely good at that, you still need to go. So in other words, you need to seriously go to take out a piece of paper, pros and cons it out, whatever you got to do, or you can fill out the link that is in the description of this podcast. I can go over privately or live on a podcast with you, or a video podcast with you, on a Zoom call with you, and I can tell you whether or not it's a good idea by looking at the whole picture. But you should be able to evaluate this for yourself. You have known by the end of a lecture, oh my God, that was a waste of my time. You have had that impression. If you have that impression more than once, then by all means, study and do things your own way instead of going to lecture, especially if you have a really long lecture. Anything over 2 hours is counterproductive, even with breaks in between, because what you're doing is we're keeping people for long, extended periods of time, not just from studying, but also their schoolwork, and also their lives, and also the tasks that they have to complete, and also work that they had to rearrange, and also babysitting. There are so many different things that begin to be affected at an exponential rate after a 2-hour-long lecture. So if your lecture is 5 hours long, chances are by the end of that, you do feel like it's a waste of your time anyway. You should determine if there's any specific part of that lecture that you still do find valuable, and at least show up for that portion of the lecture. Or have a friend that refuses to not go to lecture, so they're always in lecture, and then text them like, hey, like what's the deal? Show up to the school, get into a study room, or go to the library and do your studying. And if your friend texts you like, hey, this is good stuff you need to be getting in here, they're going over specifics about the test or whatever, then you need to just go ahead and hop in there. That's the way that I would personally do that. So again, the last one is kind of a hot take. Even though it's common sense, if something's not giving you value, you shouldn't show up to it. But that's more than just, should I skip it to study? This is also, should I just stop going to class in general? If you have 7 hours of class or more, 8 hours of class, 10-hour class day, 4 and up is where you should really be evaluating whether it's worth your time. I remember a long time ago, I went to Carrington when I was going to school to be a medical assistant. And at that time, which has been years and years ago, so the people that were teaching there are long gone, you literally showed up and they seriously read you a PowerPoint. They already gave you that PowerPoint, or they were going to give it to you after that. And it all came from the book. And they told you the chapters beforehand. So what did I do? I stopped going to class. I would read. I would extract from the PowerPoint and make flashcards. I would study, and I would get 97, 98 on almost every test. However, that program and this is why it's a bad idea. This is, by the way, one little extra tip that no matter what I've just said up until this point, you should still go to class. And that is if you are getting points for it and you are getting credit for it. If attendance affects your grade, you need to go. As antiquated and stupid as I think that is as adult learners, for you to require your students to come to class in person and attend for a grade, you can put in air quotes participation points. But my ass, that's not participation points. An adult learner should have the choice. We're not school children. So that being said, though, whether you agree with it or not, I don't personally agree with that. But if you're going to a school or if you're in a class where they say your attendance here is mandatory, obviously go. Don't lose points for that to gain points on a test. That's just stupid. That's madness. So that's the one instance in which no matter what, you should always go to class if you're getting credit for it. So if you like this podcast, please go ahead and leave a like, leave a comment, follow, and share with your friends. As you've noticed, this is not a video podcast as I was originally going to intend to do. I am putting all my video resources into my YouTube channel, link in the description. So go ahead and leave a follow. Also, there's a link in the description of this podcast, or if you would like to be on the podcast, you can also just leave questions here if you don't want to leave it in the comments. Or you can have specific requests for different episodes if you don't want your name in the comments. If you have any suggestions, okay? So go ahead and comment, like, and follow, and fill out that link in the description if you want any specific coaching, whether that's live on the podcast, live on YouTube, or in private. I do have limited availability for this. I am going to work at, I have a calendar all set up. So if you do happen to send me something saying, hey, I need some mentoring in one particular area, you're going to get a link. I'm going to just send you back a link, and that you're going to be able to schedule times on my calendar. And those are times that I've specifically set aside for that. That being said, I'm of course not going to put that in the description of my podcast because a bunch of people can just schedule me out and never show up. And then people that really need to be helped aren't going to be able to make a spot. So I will not make that public. But if you fill out the link in the description, we can get together either remotely or in person, and we can talk through whatever you need to talk through. Again, thanks so much for listening, and go ahead and check out my YouTube channel in the link in the description. Thank you.